Introduction. Decoding Human Behavior. Human behavior is one of the most complex and fascinating subjects of study, encompassing a vast range of conscious choices, unconscious motivations, emotional impulses, social influences, and biological underpinnings that shape how we think, act, and interact with the world around us. In a time where interpersonal communication, emotional intelligence, and social awareness are increasingly vital, understanding the mechanisms that govern human behavior has never been more important. Decoding Human Behavior seeks to unravel the intricate layers behind why we do what we do, offering readers a multidisciplinary perspective that draws from psychology, neuroscience, sociology, behavioral economics, and anthropology to provide a comprehensive framework for interpreting human actions. While behavior may often appear spontaneous or unpredictable, this book emphasizes that much of it is deeply patterned, rooted in both evolutionary adaptations and cultural conditioning. Our brain, as the primary command center, is wired for survival, connection, and efficiency, meaning that many of our behaviors, ranging from snap judgments to deep-seated biases, are shaped by mental shortcuts and emotional responses developed over thousands of years. However, these biological tendencies are constantly interacting with external influences. Family upbringing, peer pressure, media exposure, social norms, and cultural values all play a role in sculpting our behavioral repertoire. From the first steps of early childhood development to the complexities of adult decision-making and group dynamics, every stage of life introduces new forces that subtly or overtly guide our actions. The digital age has further complicated human behavior, introducing virtual environments, online personas, and digital interactions that sometimes diverge significantly from our real-world selves. In exploring how behavior is influenced both by internal processes, like hormones, memory and motivation, and external systems, like authority, group belonging, and cultural expectations, this book encourages a holistic view that avoids simplistic explanations. Instead, it asks readers to see behavior as a puzzle in which each piece, biological, psychological, social, and environmental, must be considered in relation to the whole. For example, a person's tendency to procrastinate might not only stem from poor time management but also from fear of failure, perfectionism, or even evolutionary wiring to conserve energy. Likewise, aggression can be understood not merely as a personal flaw but also as a response to perceived threat, stress hormones, societal conditioning, or environmental frustration. Decoding Human Behavior also challenges the reader to reflect inwardly, to not only observe others with greater clarity but to examine their own behavior, motivations, and patterns. It asks difficult but necessary questions. Why do we sometimes act against our own self-interest? Why are we drawn to certain people or ideas? Why do we conform in some situations but rebel in others? These questions don't have singular answers, but by breaking behavior into digestible psychological and sociological principles, we can begin to recognize predictable patterns and influential triggers. Moreover, understanding behavior enhances empathy. When we grasp the reasons behind someone's actions, whether it's anxiety, upbringing, or trauma, we are more equipped to respond with compassion rather than judgment. In fields ranging from education and leadership to healthcare, law, marketing, and relationships, the insights from behavioral science offer powerful tools for influencing, guiding, and improving human outcomes. Whether you're a parent trying to understand your child's tantrums, a leader aiming to inspire your team, or simply someone curious about why people lie, fall in love, lash out, or hold on to beliefs, this book will serve as a guide. It bridges scientific research with real-world application, breaking down academic studies into accessible narratives that anyone can relate to. While rooted in evidence, the goal isn't to reduce people to formulas but to appreciate the richness and variability of human behavior. Every person is a story of biology meeting experience, emotion blending with thought, and instinct interacting with logic. By decoding this story, we gain insight not only into what makes others tick but also into the subtle forces shaping our own lives. Through exploring chapters on decision-making, emotion, personality, group influence, communication, deception, and digital behavior, readers will acquire a new lens through which to view human interaction. They will come away with not only facts and theories but a renewed sense of curiosity and respect for the human condition. Ultimately, Decoding Human Behavior is about empowerment, equipping readers with the knowledge to better navigate their personal and social worlds, to communicate more effectively, to build stronger relationships, to lead with emotional intelligence, and to live with greater self-awareness. In a world full of noise, confusion, and fast-changing norms, the ability to understand human behavior is not just a useful skill, it is an essential one. Chapter 1: The Biology of Behavior. serves as the foundational layer for understanding human action by examining the internal biological systems that govern how we think, feel, and respond to the world. Human behavior, though influenced by environment and experience, is rooted fundamentally in the body's physiology, particularly the brain, nervous system, endocrine system, and genetic blueprint. This chapter begins by exploring the architecture of the human brain, highlighting key regions like the prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making and self-control, the amygdala, involved in emotional processing, especially fear and aggression, and the hippocampus, essential for learning and memory. These brain regions work in concert with the limbic system, often referred to as the emotional brain, which acts as a central hub for processing emotions and forming behavioral responses. Our brain communicates through an intricate network of neurons, specialized cells that transmit signals via electrical impulses and chemical messengers known as neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and oxytocin play a pivotal role in regulating mood, motivation, pleasure, and social bonding. For instance, dopamine is closely linked to the brain's reward system, influencing behaviors related to addiction, goal-seeking, and even everyday habits. Serotonin affects mood and can contribute to feelings of well-being or depression, while oxytocin is associated with trust, empathy, and connection in social relationships. The chapter delves into how imbalances in these chemicals can lead to behavioral disorders such as anxiety, depression, impulsivity, and compulsive behavior. Equally important is the role of the endocrine system, particularly hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, and testosterone, which influence how we respond to stress, danger, and social challenges. The fight or flight response, for example, is triggered by a cascade of hormones preparing the body for immediate action, raising heart rate, increasing blood flow to muscles, and sharpening focus. While this response evolved to help our ancestors survive physical threats, in modern times it is often activated by psychological stressors like deadlines, conflicts, or public speaking, leading to chronic stress and long-term health consequences. Genetics also plays a critical role in shaping behavior. Our DNA influences traits such as temperament, intelligence, and susceptibility to mental illness. While no single gene dictates a specific behavior, certain gene combinations can increase the likelihood of behavioral tendencies. The chapter explains how genes and environment interact in what scientists call epigenetics, showing that life experiences can turn certain genes on or off, affecting how they are expressed without changing the DNA sequence. This means our behavior is not hardwired in a fixed way but is the product of a dynamic interplay between biology and environment. The chapter also discusses evolutionary psychology, which examines how certain behavioral traits may have evolved to solve problems of survival and reproduction. For example, fear of snakes, preference for calorie-dense foods, or attraction to specific physical traits may have had adaptive value in ancient environments, even if they seem irrational or outdated today. Similarly, behaviors such as forming alliances, protecting offspring, or displaying aggression in competition have roots in evolutionary pressures that favored social cooperation and reproductive success. By understanding these ancestral influences, we gain insight into modern behaviors that sometimes appear irrational but are deeply embedded in our biology. The chapter also explores how early life experiences affect the developing brain. During childhood, neural pathways are formed and reinforced through repeated experiences, which means that nurturing environments can promote healthy emotional regulation and learning, while neglect or trauma can disrupt brain development and lead to long-term behavioral challenges. The concept of brain plasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt throughout life, is emphasized as a hopeful reminder that biology is not destiny. Even adults can reshape their behavioral patterns through therapy, practice, learning, and intentional change. Furthermore, the chapter touches on the biological differences that may exist between individuals based on sex, hormonal cycles, and brain lateralization, noting that while average differences may exist, individual variation is vast and should be approached without reinforcing stereotypes. Neuroscientific research using brain imaging technologies like fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, has allowed scientists to observe brain activity in real time, shedding light on the biological basis of behaviors ranging from moral decision-making to addiction and empathy. These insights offer potential applications in medicine, education, criminal justice, and workplace productivity, though ethical questions about privacy, manipulation, and determinism remain. The chapter concludes by stressing that while biology is a powerful influence on behavior, it does not act in isolation. It is the first piece of the behavioral puzzle, a vital starting point for decoding the rest. Behavior is the result of a complex feedback loop between brain, body, and environment. Understanding the biological foundations gives us greater compassion for others, especially those struggling with behavioral or mental health issues, and reminds us that many of our actions stem from systems designed to protect us, even when they misfire in modern contexts. It also empowers individuals to better understand their own responses, to recognize when their biology is working for or against them, and to seek support, regulation, or change when necessary. In sum, the biology of behavior provides a comprehensive yet accessible guide to how our internal systems, brain circuits, neurotransmitters, hormones, genes, and evolutionary drives create the groundwork for all human action. This knowledge forms the bedrock for the chapters that follow, each of which builds on this biological foundation to explore the psychological, social, and cultural layers that complete the story of human behavior. Chapter 2: The Psychology of Decision-Making delves into the intricate and often irrational processes behind how humans make choices, revealing that decision-making is rarely the product of pure logic or reason, but instead the result of a complex interplay between emotion, cognition, environment, and unconscious biases. While we like to believe our choices are thoughtful and deliberate, psychological research shows that much of our decision-making happens automatically, influenced by mental shortcuts called heuristics, simple, efficient rules developed by the brain to solve problems quickly, often at the expense of accuracy. This chapter introduces the groundbreaking work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, who distinguished between two types of thinking: System 1, which is fast, intuitive, and emotionally driven, and System 2, which is slower, analytical, and effortful. Most everyday decisions are governed by System 1, leading to the frequent use of heuristics such as the availability heuristic, judging the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind, or the representativeness heuristic, where we judge a situation based on how closely it matches a mental stereotype, often ignoring base rate probabilities. These mental shortcuts help us navigate an overwhelmingly complex world but can also lead to predictable errors or cognitive biases, including confirmation bias, seeking information that confirms our beliefs, anchoring, relying too heavily on the first piece of information encountered, and loss aversion, the tendency to fear losses more than we value equivalent gains. The chapter explores how these biases can distort perception, skew risk assessment, and influence everything from consumer purchases to major life choices, often without our awareness. Emotions also play a central role in shaping decisions. The somatic marker hypothesis, proposed by neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, argues that our emotional experiences attach to memories and guide future decisions by generating gut feelings that steer us toward or away from certain options. These somatic markers are essential for navigating complex decisions, especially when logic alone provides no clear answer. However, emotional influences can be double-edged. While fear might protect us from danger, it can also lead to overreactions or avoidance. Similarly, optimism can encourage risk-taking and innovation, but it may also lead to overconfidence and poor planning. The chapter also discusses the role of framing, how the way a choice is presented can drastically alter the decision. For instance, people are more likely to choose a medical procedure with a 90% survival rate than one with a 10% mortality rate, even though both statistics mean the same thing. Such framing effects reveal how context and language subtly shape our behavior. Another important concept is decision fatigue, the mental exhaustion that results from making too many choices, which can lead to poor decisions, procrastination, or reliance on default options. This helps explain why people tend to make healthier food choices in the morning and worse ones later in the day, or why simplifying decision-making processes can improve outcomes in fields like medicine, finance, and education. Moreover, the chapter highlights how social and environmental factors influence our choices more than we realize. Social proof, for instance, looking to others to determine how to behave, can heavily sway individual decisions, especially in unfamiliar or uncertain situations. Peer pressure, authority figures, and even cultural norms shape our judgments and preferences, often overriding our personal values or logic. This is especially evident in phenomena like groupthink, where the desire for consensus suppresses dissent and critical thinking, leading to flawed or even disastrous collective decisions. Additionally, the chapter examines the paradox of choice, the idea that while some choice is necessary for freedom and satisfaction, too much choice can lead to anxiety, paralysis, and regret. Psychologist Barry Schwartz argues that in modern societies, where we are bombarded with options for everything from toothpaste brands to life partners, the abundance of choice can reduce happiness. People may fear making the wrong choice or feel unsatisfied even after choosing, plagued by what-if thinking and comparison. To address this, the book suggests that individuals can improve decision-making by adopting strategies like setting clear priorities, limiting options, using decision rules, and practicing mindfulness to tune into emotional and bodily responses. The chapter also discusses how personal values, past experiences, and personality traits affect decision-making styles. Some individuals are maximizers, those who seek the absolute best outcome in every situation, while others are satisficers who settle for good enough. Maximizers may experience more regret and second-guessing, while satisficers tend to be more content with their choices. Risk tolerance also varies between individuals, influenced by both temperament and experience, and plays a key role in decisions related to money, relationships, career, and health. Finally, the chapter looks at how understanding decision-making psychology can lead to better personal and societal outcomes. In fields like behavioral economics and public policy, nudging, subtly guiding behavior through the way choices are presented, has been used to encourage better savings habits, healthier eating, and increased organ donor registration. Rather than restricting freedom, nudges make it easier for people to make beneficial choices without conscious effort. In personal life, being aware of cognitive traps can help individuals pause, reflect, and engage their more deliberate System 2 thinking when necessary. While perfect rationality may be unattainable, self-awareness and informed decision strategies can reduce the influence of harmful biases and emotional reactivity. Ultimately, the psychology of decision-making reveals that understanding the inner workings of our choices, both big and small, can lead to greater autonomy, better judgment, and more meaningful outcomes. By becoming conscious of the often invisible forces shaping our decisions, we empower ourselves to act with intention rather than impulse, clarity rather than confusion, and integrity rather than influence. This chapter serves not only to expose the flaws in human reasoning but also to celebrate the adaptability and creativity of the human mind, reminding us that while we are not perfectly rational beings, we are capable of learning, reflection, and growth. Chapter 3, Emotion and Motivation, explores the dynamic and deeply intertwined forces that drive human behavior, emphasizing that our actions are rarely the result of cold logic but are instead propelled by powerful internal states, emotions that signal significance and motivation that fuels movement toward goals. Emotion, often misunderstood as irrational or secondary, is in fact a critical adaptive function evolved to help us survive, communicate, and make rapid decisions in a complex and ever-changing environment. At its core, emotion is a psychological and physiological response to stimuli that carry importance for our well-being, whether they relate to threats, rewards, losses, or social interactions. This chapter begins by breaking down the components of emotion: the physiological arousal, such as increased heart rate or sweating, the subjective experience, how the emotion feels internally, and the expressive behavior, such as facial expressions, body posture, or tone of voice. Drawing from the work of Paul Ekman and others, the chapter identifies universal emotions, joy, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, and surprise, that are recognized across cultures and are deeply embedded in our biology. It explains how the amygdala, a key brain structure, plays a central role in detecting emotional salience and triggering responses, particularly in relation to fear and danger, while other brain areas like the prefrontal cortex help regulate emotional reactions and align them with long-term goals. Importantly, the chapter addresses how emotions are not just reactive but also proactive. They help us anticipate and prepare for future scenarios, shape our decision-making, and color our memories, influencing how we interpret the past and plan. Motivation, on the other hand, is the driving force that initiates, guides, and sustains goal-directed behavior, often working together with emotion to energize and direct our actions. Motivation can arise from biological needs such as hunger, thirst, and sex, psychological desires such as achievement, affiliation, and autonomy, or social and cultural influences such as peer approval, moral values, or status. The chapter differentiates between intrinsic motivation, which comes from within, like curiosity, interest, or personal satisfaction, and extrinsic motivation, which is driven by external rewards or pressures, such as money, grades, or praise. It emphasizes that while both types of motivation are valid, intrinsic motivation tends to be more sustainable and fulfilling over time. Theories of motivation such as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which arranges human motivation in a pyramid from basic physiological needs up to self-actualization, and Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory, which focuses on autonomy, competence, and relatedness as key drivers of motivation, are discussed to provide a deeper framework for understanding how human needs and desires shape behavior. The chapter also explores the feedback loop between emotion and motivation. Positive emotions like joy and pride can increase motivation by signaling that we are on the right track, while negative emotions like frustration, anxiety, or guilt can either demotivate us or push us to correct our path, depending on how they are processed. For example, fear can motivate avoidance behavior to protect us from harm, while anger can drive assertiveness or resistance against perceived injustice. However, when emotions are poorly regulated or become chronic, such as persistent anxiety, depression, or apathy, they can severely undermine motivation, leading to patterns of avoidance, procrastination, or withdrawal. The importance of emotional regulation is thus highlighted as a skill that can profoundly impact our ability to stay motivated and resilient in the face of challenges. Techniques such as cognitive reappraisal, changing the way we think about a situation, mindfulness, non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, and emotional expression through writing, talking, or art, are introduced as tools to manage emotional intensity and maintain motivation. The chapter also examines the role of reward systems in the brain, particularly the function of dopamine in reinforcing behaviors that lead to pleasure or goal attainment. It explains how reward prediction errors, when outcomes are better or worse than expected, drive learning and motivation, especially in uncertain environments. This has profound implications for behavior in areas like addiction, habit formation, and goal pursuit, where the brain's reward system can sometimes hijack rational thinking in favor of short-term gratification. Social and cultural influences on emotion and motivation are also explored, showing how societal expectations shape what emotions are acceptable to express and what goals are seen as worthy of pursuit. For instance, in some cultures, expressing sadness might be seen as weakness, while in others, it is seen as a healthy form of vulnerability. Similarly, motivations like individual achievement may be emphasized in Western societies, while communal harmony may be more valued in collectivist cultures. The chapter makes clear that both emotion and motivation are not isolated within the individual but are deeply embedded in interpersonal and social contexts. It also touches on how emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive, understand, regulate, and use emotions effectively, can significantly enhance motivation, leadership, empathy, and relationship quality. Individuals with high emotional intelligence are often more resilient, better at handling stress, and more adept at pursuing long-term goals despite setbacks. In academic and workplace settings, fostering motivation and emotional well-being has been linked to increased performance, engagement, and satisfaction. The chapter concludes by reinforcing the idea that emotions are not barriers to rationality but are essential signals that guide and energize behavior, while motivation is the fuel that propels us toward meaning, purpose, and achievement. Together, they form the heart of human behavior, constantly interacting, shifting, and adapting as we navigate life's challenges and opportunities. Understanding how emotions arise and how motivation can be nurtured or disrupted gives us the tools not only to better understand others but also to take control of our own lives with greater clarity, compassion, and intention. Rather than suppressing emotions or forcing motivation, the chapter encourages a balanced approach, listening to our emotional signals, aligning our goals with our values, and cultivating habits and environments that support ongoing engagement and growth. In essence, emotion and motivation reveals that to truly decode human behavior, we must first understand what moves us, what stirs us emotionally, and what drives us forward, even when logic alone falls short. Chapter 4, Social Influence and Group Dynamics, investigates how human behavior is profoundly shaped not only by internal drives but by the social environment, by the presence, expectations, and behaviors of others, and emphasizes that people rarely act in isolation. Instead, they are constantly responding to, influenced by, and influencing the groups to which they belong. This chapter explores the psychological mechanisms through which individuals conform to social norms, obey authority, comply with requests, and adapt their behavior depending on group membership, roles, and context. Drawing on classic experiments such as Solomon Asch's conformity study, where participants agreed with obviously incorrect group judgments to avoid standing out, and Stanley Milgram's obedience experiment, where individuals were willing to administer what they believed were painful electric shocks to another person under instruction from an authority figure. The chapter reveals the unsettling but critical insight that people often suspend personal judgment in favor of group consensus or perceived authority. It explains that conformity can arise from two sources: normative influence, where individuals conform to fit in and avoid social rejection, and informational influence, where they conform because they believe the group knows better. While such tendencies are essential for social harmony and learning, they can also lead to irrational or unethical behavior, especially when critical thinking is suppressed. The chapter then delves into group dynamics, the ways people behave in groups, including the formation of roles, hierarchies, alliances, and subcultures that subtly dictate behavior. It describes how individuals adopt social roles such as leader, follower, or rebel, and how these roles can influence identity and conduct, sometimes in dramatic ways as seen in Philip Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiment, where participants quickly internalize the roles of guards and prisoners, leading to abusive and submissive behaviors that shocked even the researchers. This points to the power of situational factors over personality in determining behavior, reinforcing the idea that context can trigger responses that individuals would not typically exhibit alone. Group membership also shapes in-group and out-group distinctions, which influence how people perceive others. The social identity theory, developed by Henri Tajfel, explains how individuals derive a significant portion of their self-esteem from group affiliations, whether based on ethnicity, nationality, religion, profession, or even shared interests. This leads to in-group favoritism, positive bias toward one's own group, and sometimes out-group discrimination, stereotyping, or prejudice. Even minimal group distinctions can trigger these biases, which can escalate to conflict or exclusion if unchecked. The chapter also discusses de-individuation, a phenomenon where individuals and groups may lose their sense of personal accountability and behave in ways they never would alone, often seen in mob behavior, online trolling, or riots. When anonymity increases and individual identity is submerged within a crowd, behaviors are guided more by group norms than personal values. On the flip side, social facilitation and social loafing highlight how group presence can both enhance and diminish performance. People may perform better on simple tasks when observed by others but worse on complex tasks due to pressure, and they may exert less effort when individual contributions are not identifiable in group tasks. These dynamics are critical in understanding team performance in workplaces, sports, classrooms, and political movements. Additionally, the chapter addresses groupthink, a phenomenon in which the desire for harmony or conformity within a cohesive group leads to poor decision-making, as dissenting voices are suppressed and critical analysis is overlooked. Historical examples such as the Bay of Pigs invasion or the Challenger shuttle disaster are examined to illustrate how groupthink can have dire real-world consequences when group loyalty overrides rational judgment. To combat such pitfalls, the chapter introduces strategies like encouraging dissent, assigning a devil's advocate, and promoting diverse perspectives to maintain healthy group deliberation. Social influence extends beyond face-to-face interactions and is deeply embedded in cultural norms, media representations, and online platforms. The digital age has intensified group dynamics through virtual communities, echo chambers, and algorithm-driven content that can reinforce beliefs, create group polarization, and spread misinformation rapidly. The chapter emphasizes that online behavior often mirrors or amplifies offline tendencies, with individuals adopting personas that align with digital groups, leading to heightened tribalism, cancel culture, or viral social movements. Social norms, the implicit or explicit rules that govern behavior within a group, are also discussed as powerful regulators of conduct. Norms guide everything from dress codes and etiquette to political opinions and moral judgments, and individuals often follow them without conscious awareness. When norms shift, such as changing attitudes toward gender, race, or environmental responsibility, behavior at the societal level transforms accordingly. The chapter explores how norm enforcement occurs through subtle cues like eye contact, laughter, or silence, and through formal mechanisms like laws or institutional policies. Compliance, the tendency to agree to requests or demands, is examined next, along with techniques used to increase it, such as the foot-in-the-door strategy, starting with a small request, or door in the face, starting with a large request likely to be refused, then offering a smaller one. These techniques are widely used in marketing, politics, and interpersonal persuasion, highlighting the practical applications of social psychology in everyday life. Obedience, while essential in structures like military units, schools, or hospitals, is also examined critically, particularly in terms of ethical boundaries and moral responsibility. The chapter doesn't shy away from exploring darker aspects of social influence, how it can lead to prejudice, conformity to injustice, or passive complicity in harm, but it also emphasizes the potential for positive influence. When harnessed ethically, group dynamics can foster cooperation, altruism, and collective resilience. Movements for civil rights, environmental action, or public health rely on shared norms and group cohesion to mobilize meaningful change. The chapter concludes by stressing that while social influence is inevitable and often invisible, awareness of its mechanisms empowers individuals to resist manipulation, stand up for their values, and foster healthier group environments. Understanding how we are influenced by peers, culture, media, or authority enables more conscious behavior and more ethical leadership. At its core, social influence and group dynamics reveals that human beings are profoundly social creatures, and much of what we think of as individual behavior is deeply embedded in group contexts. By decoding these influences, we gain the power to shape not only our personal choices but the larger systems and societies we participate in. Chapter 5, Communication and Body Language, delves into the essential role that communication, both verbal and nonverbal, plays in shaping human behavior, relationships, and social structures, highlighting that while spoken language is a powerful tool, much of what we convey is transmitted silently through posture, facial expressions, tone, and gestures. This chapter begins by framing communication as more than the simple exchange of words. It is a dynamic, multifaceted process that involves encoding, transmitting, interpreting, and responding to messages within contexts. Language enables us to share ideas, express needs, resolve conflicts, and build cultures, but the true depth of human communication lies in the unspoken cues that often speak louder than words. Nonverbal communication, often called body language, encompasses a wide range of behaviors: facial expressions, eye contact, body orientation, movement, proximity, touch, gestures, and vocal tone, also called paralanguage, that constantly shape the meaning of our verbal interactions. Studies show that in many interpersonal exchanges, especially those involving emotion or ambiguity, most of the meaning is derived from nonverbal signals, not from what is said but from how it is said. For example, a statement like, "I'm fine," can express reassurance, irritation, or sadness depending on the speaker's tone, facial expression, and posture. This chapter draws on research from scholars such as Albert Mehrabian, who argued that communication of emotions and attitudes is approximately 7% verbal, 38% vocal, tone, pitch, and 55% visual, body language, and facial expression, though the exact numbers vary by context. The chapter emphasizes that being attuned to nonverbal cues is essential for understanding intention, detecting deception, building trust, and navigating social dynamics effectively. Facial expressions are one of the most universal forms of nonverbal communication, spontaneous, involuntary, and consistent across cultures, conveying fundamental emotions like happiness, anger, fear, sadness, surprise, and disgust. Eye contact, another critical signal, can convey attention, aggression, dominance, honesty, or affection, depending on its duration and intensity. Meanwhile, gestures like nodding, shrugging, or pointing can reinforce verbal content or stand alone as complete messages. Proxemics, the study of personal space, shows how spatial boundaries differ across cultures and contexts, influencing comfort, authority, and intimacy. In Western cultures, standing too close might feel invasive, while in others, physical proximity signals warmth and connection. Similarly, haptics, the use of touch, can communicate everything from friendship to authority to aggression, with cultural and situational nuance. The chapter also explores how body posture communicates openness or defensiveness, confidence or submission, and engagement or disinterest. An open posture with uncrossed arms and relaxed shoulders typically indicates receptiveness, while closed-off stances might suggest discomfort, hostility, or anxiety. Vocalics, or the nonverbal aspects of speech, such as tone, pitch, rate, and volume, play a crucial role in conveying emotion and intent. A raised voice may suggest urgency or anger, while a soft, steady tone might express calmness or empathy. This helps explain why emails and texts often lead to misunderstandings. They lack these nonverbal layers that color spoken interaction. The chapter explores communication styles and their cultural dimensions, highlighting that norms for body language and speech vary significantly across societies. For instance, in some Eastern cultures, indirect communication and subtle gestures are valued as signs of respect and humility, while in many Western contexts, directness and assertiveness are seen as indicators of honesty and strength. Misinterpreting these cues can lead to cross-cultural misunderstandings, particularly in global workplaces, diplomacy, or multicultural settings. The chapter also delves into gender differences in communication patterns, noting that while individual variation is vast, socialization often leads men and women to use and interpret verbal and nonverbal cues differently. For example, women may use more expressive facial cues and eye contact to build connection, while men may rely more on status-oriented communication cues, though these trends are not fixed and are shaped heavily by context and culture. Another important focus is on listening, often overlooked but central to effective communication. Active listening involves more than just hearing words. It requires giving full attention, interpreting nonverbal signals, providing feedback, and suspending judgment. Poor listening habits such as interrupting, daydreaming, or forming premature responses can break down communication and erode relationships. The chapter emphasizes the importance of empathy, feeling with another person, and perspective taking, seeing through another's eyes, as key components of meaningful communication. Empathic communication is not only critical in personal relationships but also in leadership, counseling, teaching, and conflict resolution. Digital communication, which has become dominant in many aspects of life, is also examined. Texting, emailing, and social media interactions strip away much of the nonverbal context, often leading to ambiguity or misinterpretation. Emojis and punctuation have emerged as attempts to compensate for the absence of tone and expression, but the richness of in-person communication remains difficult to replicate in digital spaces. Furthermore, the chapter explores how communication is used strategically, how politicians, marketers, leaders, and influencers craft messages using rhetorical devices, repetition, storytelling, and persuasive nonverbal cues to shape perception and behavior. It shows how eye contact, confident posture, and vocal control are used to project authority, charisma, and credibility. The dark side of communication is also acknowledged, including manipulation, gaslighting, and deception. Recognizing insincere or manipulative body language, inconsistent verbal-nonverbal alignment, or tactics like flattery and guilt-tripping is key to protecting oneself from exploitation. The chapter also touches on deception detection, explaining that while there's no foolproof way to spot a lie, micro-expressions, brief, involuntary facial expressions, and body language incongruence can offer clues when a person's verbal message doesn't align with their nonverbal signals. However, over-reliance on lie detection myths is cautioned against, as individual differences and anxiety can mimic deceptive cues. Finally, the chapter underscores that communication is not just a skill but a core element of human connection, shaping identity, relationships, and society at large. Whether in a one-on-one conversation, a public speech, or a silent exchange of glances, every communicative act carries meaning and influence. Becoming fluent in both verbal and nonverbal language is essential not only for personal success but for understanding others, resolving conflict, and fostering empathy. By learning to read body language accurately, express oneself clearly, and listen deeply, individuals can dramatically improve the quality of their relationships, navigate complex social environments, and influence others with authenticity and integrity. In conclusion, communication and body language reveals that human connection depends not merely on what we say, but on how we say it, and more importantly, how we understand and respond to the silent signals beneath the surface of every interaction. Chapter 6, Personality and Individual Differences, explores the enduring patterns of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that make each person unique, offering insight into how stable traits interact with life experiences, biological factors, and situational context to shape the way individuals perceive the world, make decisions, and relate to others. This chapter begins by defining personality as a consistent set of psychological characteristics that influence how a person thinks, feels, and behaves across different situations and over time. While everyone shares the same basic psychological systems, what distinguishes one individual from another are the unique combinations and intensities of traits, temperaments, and dispositions they exhibit. One of the most widely studied and accepted frameworks for understanding personality is the five-factor model, often referred to as the Big Five, which identifies 5 broad dimensions of personality: openness to experience, curiosity, imagination, and willingness to explore new ideas, conscientiousness, self-discipline, organization, and reliability, extroversion, sociability, energy and assertiveness, agreeableness, compassion, cooperation, and trust in others, and neuroticism, emotional instability, anxiety, and moodiness. Each individual scores differently along these dimensions, and these combinations contribute to distinctive personality profiles that influence behavior in predictable ways. For example, a highly conscientious person is more likely to be dependable and goal-oriented, while someone low in neuroticism may remain calm under pressure. The chapter emphasizes that while personality traits are relatively stable, they are not fixed. They can shift subtly over time due to life experiences, personal growth, or major life events, such as career changes, trauma, or parenthood. In addition to traits, the chapter explores the biological and genetic underpinnings of personality, highlighting studies involving twins and adopted children that suggest genetics accounts for roughly 40 to 60% of the variance in personality traits, while the remainder is shaped by environment, learning, and culture. The temperament observed in early childhood, such as a baby's tendency toward being calm or reactive, is thought to be biologically based and forms the foundation upon which personality later develops. Neurobiological systems such as the sensitivity of the dopamine system, linked to reward seeking, or the amygdala's reactivity, linked to fear, also play a role in shaping individual differences in traits like extroversion or neuroticism. The chapter goes on to explain that while personality helps explain behavioral consistency, it does not operate in isolation. Situational factors also have a powerful influence on behavior. The interactionist perspective suggests that behavior is the product of both personality and context, meaning even an introverted person may act outgoing in familiar settings, while an extrovert might behave reservedly in threatening environments. This interplay explains why predictions based solely on personality traits sometimes fall short without understanding the surrounding circumstances. Moreover, personality is expressed not only in how individuals behave but also in how they process information, manage emotions, and approach goals. Cognitive styles, ways of thinking, coping strategies, risk tolerance, self-esteem, and emotional regulation all vary widely between individuals and are linked to personality dimensions. For instance, people high in openness may seek out novelty and be more creative, while those high in neuroticism may experience stronger stress reactions and be more prone to anxiety or mood disorders. The chapter also highlights how self-concept, the beliefs and perceptions we hold about ourselves, emerges from and reinforces personality traits. A person who sees themselves as competent and capable, a high self-efficacy belief, is more likely to pursue challenges and persist through setbacks, whereas a negative self-concept may lead to avoidance or learned helplessness. Importantly, personality not only affects personal well-being but also impacts relationships, career paths, leadership styles, and even health outcomes. For example, conscientious individuals tend to live longer due to better self-care and planning, while high neuroticism is correlated with increased vulnerability to stress-related illness. In interpersonal relationships, compatibility often hinges on complementary or shared traits, and understanding personality can improve communication, empathy, and conflict resolution. The chapter also examines various personality typologies and theories that have influenced the field, such as Carl Jung's ideas on introversion and extroversion, which laid the groundwork for tools like the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI. Though such instruments are widely used in business and personal development despite criticism over their scientific validity. In contrast, the Big Five model, grounded in empirical research, offers a more reliable and nuanced framework for understanding individual differences. The chapter further explores personality disorders, which are enduring, maladaptive patterns of behavior and inner experience that deviate from cultural expectations and cause distress or impairment. Conditions such as borderline, narcissistic, or antisocial personality disorder are examined not to pathologize individuals, but to understand how extreme variants of normal personality traits can interfere with functioning and relationships. Early life experiences, trauma, and environmental instability often play significant roles in the development of such disorders. Cultural factors are also addressed, as personality does not develop in a vacuum. Cultural values, norms, and expectations shape which traits are encouraged or discouraged. For instance, traits like independence and assertiveness may be rewarded in individualistic cultures but viewed less favorably in collectivist societies that value harmony and interdependence. Cross-cultural studies reveal both universality and cultural variation in personality expression, reinforcing the need to interpret traits within appropriate social and cultural contexts. Gender socialization, too, can influence how traits manifest and are perceived. For example, assertiveness in men might be seen as leadership, while in women it may be misinterpreted as aggression, reflecting societal biases. The chapter emphasizes the importance of self-awareness and personality assessment, introducing tools like the NEOPIR and Hexaco, which allow individuals to better understand their own tendencies, preferences, and potential areas for growth. Rather than labeling or judging personality types, the goal is to promote deeper self-understanding and greater appreciation for human diversity. By understanding personality and individual differences, we can become more effective in our personal development, interpersonal relationships, team dynamics, leadership approaches, and even conflict resolution strategies. The chapter concludes by underscoring that while personality offers a stable framework for understanding behavior, it is also flexible and dynamic, shaped by interactions between biology, environment, and conscious effort. No personality is inherently good or bad. Rather, different traits may be advantageous in different contexts. The more we understand these individual differences, the more we can appreciate the unique contributions of each person, build more inclusive and adaptive social systems, and cultivate empathy for those who think and feel differently from ourselves. In essence, personality and individual differences reminds us that human behavior is not one size fits all, and to decode it fully, we must consider not just universal patterns but the unique psychological makeup of everyone. Chapter 7, Culture, Identity and Behavior, explores the profound influence of cultural systems and identity formation on human behavior, emphasizing that individuals are not only shaped by biological and psychological factors but also by the broader social and cultural frameworks in which they are embedded. Culture encompasses the shared beliefs, values, norms, customs, languages, symbols, and rituals of a group, and it provides the lens through which individuals interpret the world and their place within it. This chapter argues that behavior cannot be fully understood without considering the cultural context that gives it meaning. What is considered polite, aggressive, moral, or respectful in one culture may be seen entirely differently in another. Culture shapes behavior both overtly and subtly, through explicit rules such as laws and etiquette, and through implicit assumptions such as gender roles or views on authority, often internalized so deeply that individuals may not even recognize them as cultural influences. The chapter delves into the distinction between individualistic cultures, which prioritize personal autonomy, independence, and self-expression, commonly found in Western societies like the United States and much of Europe, and collectivistic cultures, which emphasize group harmony, interdependence, and social responsibility, often found in parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. These orientations shape not only how people define themselves, either as independent agents or as parts of larger social units, but also how they think, feel, and act. For instance, in individualistic cultures, people may focus more on personal achievement and internal goals, while in collectivistic cultures, behavior is often guided by relational obligations, family expectations, and maintaining group cohesion. This distinction affects communication styles, emotional expression, conflict resolution, and even memory and perception. The chapter also explores identity formation, which refers to the ongoing development of a person's sense of self, influenced by both internal factors like personality and values and external factors like cultural norms, social feedback, and life experiences. Identity is multifaceted and can include aspects such as nationality, ethnicity, gender, religion, language, profession, and social roles, each contributing to how people see themselves and how they are seen by others. The chapter emphasizes that identity is not fixed but fluid, shaped and reshaped across time and in response to changing social contexts. It also acknowledges that people hold multiple identities simultaneously, which may become more or less salient depending on the situation. For example, a woman might emphasize her role as a mother in a family setting, her ethnic identity during a cultural celebration, or her professional identity at work. The theory of social identity, developed by Henri Tajfel, is examined in this context, positing that individuals derive a significant part of their self-esteem and meaning from group membership, and this affiliation leads to in-group favoritism and out-group bias. This dynamic can create strong bonds but also tensions between groups, contributing to stereotypes, discrimination, and intergroup conflict. The chapter also introduces the concept of cultural scripts, culturally embedded patterns of behavior that guide people's actions in specific contexts, such as how to grieve, celebrate, or express affection. These scripts can vary drastically between cultures and often go unquestioned by members within them. Furthermore, the chapter explores how acculturation and bicultural identity affect individuals living between or within multiple cultural frameworks, such as immigrants, expatriates, or children of multicultural families. These individuals often navigate complex identity negotiations, balancing the values and expectations of more than one cultural system. Some may feel enriched by this dual identity, while others may struggle with cultural dissonance, marginalization, or a sense of not fully belonging to either culture. The psychological impacts of cultural transitions such as culture shock, identity confusion, or code switching, the practice of shifting between languages or cultural expressions depending on the context, are explored to highlight the nuanced emotional and behavioral challenges of multicultural living. The chapter also discusses stereotypes and their influence on behavior, including stereotype threat, where individuals underperform in situations where they fear confirming negative stereotypes about their group. These stereotypes can be deeply embedded in media, education, and institutions, shaping how individuals are perceived and how they perceive themselves. Cultural narratives, both empowering and limiting, contribute to identity development by framing what is possible, desirable, or acceptable within a given society. For example, media portrayals of gender roles or ethnic groups can reinforce societal expectations and influence aspirations, self-worth, and behavior. In this way, identity is both a personal and social construct, constantly negotiated through interaction with others and engagement with cultural content. The chapter also highlights how globalization and digital technology are reshaping cultural and identity landscapes. People today are exposed to a wider range of cultural values, practices, and identities through travel, social media, entertainment, and global markets. This exposure can lead to cultural blending, innovation, and greater empathy across differences, but it can also trigger identity anxiety, cultural homogenization, or backlash from those who feel their traditional values are threatened. Youth, in particular, are growing up in increasingly hybrid cultural environments, often integrating global influences with local traditions, creating new forms of identity that transcend geographic boundaries. The chapter also introduces intersectionality, a framework for understanding how multiple aspects of identity, e.g., race, gender, class, sexuality, ability, intersect to create unique experiences of privilege or oppression. Rather than viewing identity categories in isolation, intersectionality recognizes that people experience the world in multidimensional ways and that behavior is shaped not just by culture or personality alone, but by how these layers of identity interact within specific social and structural contexts. This lens is crucial in analyzing social justice issues, systemic inequality, and the behavioral consequences of exclusion or marginalization. In the context of behavior, identity can influence motivation, coping styles, moral reasoning, political beliefs, and interpersonal dynamics. For example, someone with a strong religious identity may make decisions guided by spiritual values, while someone with a marginalized racial identity may develop heightened social awareness or adaptive behaviors in response to discrimination. Ultimately, the chapter argues that understanding behavior through the lens of culture and identity fosters empathy, reduces prejudice, and enhances the ability to interact effectively across differences. The more we understand about the diverse ways people define themselves and are shaped by their cultural backgrounds, the more equipped we are to build inclusive communities and meaningful connections. The chapter concludes by emphasizing that decoding human behavior requires not only looking inward at the psychological and biological aspects of individuals but also outward at the cultural and social forces that give shape and meaning to human life. Identity is not merely a reflection of who we are, it is also a story of where we come from, who we belong to, and who we choose to become. Chapter 8, Deception and Self-Deception, delves into the intricate psychological and evolutionary underpinnings of both lying to others and lying to oneself, revealing how deception plays a central, if uncomfortable, role in human behavior and social interaction. The chapter opens by defining deception as the deliberate attempt to mislead others by conveying false information or withholding the truth, while self-deception is the process of unconsciously convincing oneself of something untrue or selectively forgetting, minimizing, or distorting reality. While often condemned morally, the chapter argues that deception is not merely an aberration of character but a deeply embedded feature of human cognition, serving adaptive purposes in both social and internal domains. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that deception evolved as a survival tool, allowing individuals to manipulate perceptions, gain competitive advantages, avoid punishment, enhance social status, or secure mates. For example, an animal that can mimic a more dangerous species gains protection, and humans who can skillfully lie may be more persuasive, escape accountability, or maintain social harmony. The chapter emphasizes that humans are particularly sophisticated deceivers due to the development of theory of mind, the ability to understand that others have thoughts, beliefs, and perspectives different from one's own, which enables the construction of convincing lies tailored to another's expectations. Deception is presented not as rare but as surprisingly routine. Studies show that people lie on average once or twice per day, often in minor ways, white lies, intended to protect others' feelings or smooth over social encounters. The chapter categorizes different types of lies, fabrications, exaggerations, omissions, and half-truths, and examines the motivations behind them, ranging from self-protection and avoidance of conflict to manipulation and personal gain. Importantly, it highlights that deception is not always malicious. In some contexts, it may be socially necessary or even pro-social, such as lying to comfort a grieving friend or to de-escalate a tense situation. Yet chronic or manipulative lying can be corrosive, damaging trust and distorting relationships, especially when tied to personality disorders like narcissism or psychopathy. The chapter also examines the psychological costs of lying, noting that deceptive behavior often leads to cognitive load, emotional strain, and anxiety. Maintaining a lie requires mental effort to keep track of false details and avoid contradictions, a phenomenon known as the liar's burden. Over time, this mental strain can manifest in stress-related symptoms and decreased psychological well-being. However, frequent liars, especially those with antisocial traits, may experience less of this cognitive or emotional burden, revealing an important individual difference in how deception is experienced and managed. When exploring self-deception, the chapter turns inward, focusing on the ways people protect their self-esteem, maintain a coherent narrative of the self, or reduce cognitive dissonance by distorting truth. Unlike deliberate lying, self-deception is typically unconscious and automatic. People sincerely believe their false interpretations or selectively remember information that supports their preferred view. For instance, someone might unconsciously downplay a personal failure, blame external circumstances, or reframe past events to preserve a positive self-image. This form of deception is closely tied to defense mechanisms identified by Freud and later psychologists, such as denial, projection, rationalization, and repression, which allow individuals to avoid painful emotions or threatening truths. The chapter explains that while self-deception can impair judgment and hinder growth, it also serves a protective function, buffering individuals from anxiety, shame, or despair, and preserving motivation, optimism, and psychological resilience. From this perspective, self-deception can be seen as a psychological immune system, selectively filtering reality to sustain functioning in the face of difficulty. However, when self-deception becomes rigid or pervasive, it can lead to disconnection from reality, poor decision-making, and fractured relationships. For example, a person who refuses to acknowledge a toxic relationship or a harmful habit may delay necessary change and suffer long-term consequences. The chapter also explores how confirmation bias, motivated reasoning, and cognitive dissonance contribute to self-deception. People tend to seek out information that confirms their existing beliefs and ignore evidence that contradicts them, reinforcing false views over time. Motivated reasoning allows individuals to use logic selectively, applying scrutiny only to evidence that challenges their worldview while accepting supporting information uncritically. Cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs, drives people to resolve the inconsistency, often by altering their beliefs or memories in ways that are emotionally, not rationally, satisfying. In social and political life, these mechanisms fuel polarization and ideological rigidity, allowing individuals to rationalize unethical behavior or ignore inconvenient truths. The chapter warns that large-scale self-deception, when shared by groups or institutions, can perpetuate systemic injustice, denial of science, or historical revisionism, as individuals collectively distort truth to maintain group identity, status, or comfort. The intersection between self-deception and social deception is also examined, showing how people often deceive themselves to better deceive others, convincing themselves of their own innocence, superiority, or intentions to appear more convincing or reduce guilt. This double-blind deception, as described by evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers, allows for smoother manipulation of others because the deceiver truly believes the lie. The chapter further explores body language and behavioral cues as indicators of deception, such as inconsistent speech, micro-expressions, or nervous gestures, but warns against over-reliance on these signals, as there is no universal Pinocchio's nose, and lie detection remains imprecise. Even trained professionals like law enforcement agents or judges often perform only slightly better than chance when detecting lies, and overconfidence in one's ability to spot deception can lead to serious errors. The role of technology in deception is also considered. Social media enables people to curate idealized versions of themselves, sometimes blurring the line between aspiration and reality, while digital anonymity can embolden more overt forms of deception, such as catfishing, scamming, or spreading misinformation. In this way, technology amplifies both interpersonal and societal deception, creating echo chambers that reinforce falsehoods and limit exposure to corrective feedback. Finally, the chapter reflects on ethical and philosophical questions about deception. Is all lying inherently wrong, or can it be justified in the service of higher moral goods? Can self-deception be ethically neutral if it helps a person cope or function? The answers are complex and context-dependent, requiring a nuanced understanding of intention, harm, and consequence. The chapter concludes by acknowledging that deception and self-deception, while often portrayed negatively, are part of the human condition. Strategies evolved to help us survive, relate, and maintain psychological balance. While striving for honesty both with others and us is a noble goal, it must be balanced with compassion and awareness of the psychological functions deception can serve. Recognizing when we or others are distorting the truth is a vital step toward greater self-awareness, emotional maturity, and authentic relationships. Ultimately, decoding deception means not only spotting lies but understanding the fears, desires, and vulnerabilities that lie beneath them. Chapter 9: Behavior in the Digital Age examines the transformative impact of technology and digital environments on human behavior, identity, communication, and mental well-being, arguing that our psychological landscape is being reshaped as profoundly by algorithms and screens as it once was by culture and biology. In an era where people spend increasing portions of their lives online, this chapter explores how digital technologies, from smartphones and social media platforms to artificial intelligence and virtual reality, both amplify and alter fundamental aspects of human behavior. At its core, the digital age has redefined how we connect, learn, express ourselves, and form identities. Social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X, formerly Twitter, act as arenas for both authentic interaction and performative self-presentation, offering constant opportunities for validation, comparison, and social signaling. Individuals curate digital personas, often idealized versions of themselves, to align with social norms or desired identities, leading to a blurring of boundaries between reality and performance. This phenomenon fosters a culture of comparison, where likes, followers, and engagement metrics become proxies for self-worth, contributing to anxiety, depression, and diminished self-esteem, particularly among adolescents and young adults. The chapter discusses how dopamine feedback loops engineered into digital platforms, through endless scrolling, intermittent rewards, and algorithmic personalization, create addictive usage patterns like those seen in gambling or substance use. These platforms are designed to maximize attention and engagement, often hijacking cognitive control and exploiting users' vulnerabilities. As a result, behaviors such as doom scrolling, compulsive checking, and phantom vibration syndrome emerge, demonstrating how deeply technology can rewire habits and even neural circuitry. Moreover, the chapter explores how digital communication alters the dynamics of social interaction. While online spaces have enabled global connectivity and new forms of community and activism, they also facilitate disinhibition, where anonymity and physical distance reduce empathy and increase hostile, impulsive, or dishonest behavior. The rise of trolling, cyberbullying, and cancel culture are examined as consequences of this phenomenon, with the chapter noting that individuals may behave online in ways they never would face-to-face, often without fully recognizing the real-world emotional and psychological consequences for others. In parallel, the chapter investigates how digital technology changes identity development, especially during formative years. Young people now navigate hybrid identities that integrate both online and offline selves, shaped not only by family and culture but also by influencers, trends, and virtual peer groups. Digital identity can be fluid, playful, and experimental, offering marginalized individuals spaces for expression and belonging, but it can also lead to identity fragmentation, as people maintain multiple, sometimes conflicting personas across platforms. Furthermore, the constant exposure to filtered, curated content contributes to imposter syndrome, body image issues, and fear of missing out, FOMO, reinforcing feelings of inadequacy and social alienation. The chapter also explores the role of algorithms and echo chambers in shaping belief systems and behaviors. Algorithmic filtering personalizes content based on previous clicks, likes, and searches, creating self-reinforcing feedback loops that can entrench biases, limit exposure to diverse perspectives, and radicalize behavior. This dynamic has significant implications for political polarization, misinformation, and public discourse, where people may become more extreme in their views or resistant to factual correction. Behavioral manipulation through data-driven targeting, used in marketing, political campaigning, and even news delivery, is critiqued for undermining autonomy and informed decision-making. The chapter also covers the psychological impact of digital surveillance and the attention economy, highlighting how constant monitoring, both voluntary, through sharing, and involuntary, through data collection, shapes behavior. Knowing one is always being watched can increase self-censorship, conformity, and anxiety, even as individuals continue to share personal information for convenience or connection. This paradox, wanting both privacy and visibility, illustrates the complex trade-offs people make in digital life. Meanwhile, technology's effects on cognitive behavior are explored through studies showing declining attention spans, reduced deep reading, and increased multitasking, which impair focus, memory retention, and emotional regulation. While technology offers immense educational and informational resources, the overload of stimuli and perpetual connectivity can fragment mental energy and lead to cognitive fatigue. The chapter also discusses online relationships and how intimacy, trust, and empathy are being renegotiated in digital spaces. Virtual dating, online friendships, and parasocial relationships, one-sided attachments to influencers or content creators, demonstrate how emotional bonds are formed and sustained across screens. While some of these connections are meaningful and supportive, others may be shallow, deceptive, or exploitative. The role of artificial intelligence in simulating human interaction, through chatbots, virtual assistants, and AI-generated personas, is explored as a future behavioral frontier, raising questions about authenticity, loneliness, and human connection. In professional life, remote work, digital collaboration tools, and virtual meetings have reshaped workplace dynamics, introducing both flexibility and new challenges, such as Zoom fatigue, work-life boundary erosion, and a lack of spontaneous social interaction. The chapter also touches on digital activism and the power of online platforms to mobilize social movements, raise awareness, and hold institutions accountable, while also acknowledging the risks of slacktivism, performative engagement, and misinformation spread. Furthermore, the chapter explores the ethical and psychological implications of virtual reality (VR) and augmented reality (AR) technologies, which allow users to enter immersive, simulated environments. These tools can offer powerful experiences in education, therapy, and entertainment, but also pose risks of escapism, desensitization, and identity confusion. As reality becomes increasingly augmented or gamified, individuals may struggle to distinguish between the real and the virtual, especially with the advent of the metaverse and AI-generated deepfakes. Lastly, the chapter emphasizes the growing need for digital literacy and behavioral resilience, encouraging critical thinking, intentional technology use, and emotional self-awareness. It argues for a conscious balance between online and offline life, advocating for digital hygiene habits like screen time boundaries, device-free zones, and mindful media consumption. The chapter concludes by warning against technophobia or blind techno-optimism, and instead calls for a nuanced understanding of how digital environments interact with human psychology. While the digital age introduces profound behavioral challenges, from attention disorders to digital loneliness, it also provides new avenues for creativity, connection, and self-discovery. Ultimately, the question is not whether technology changes behavior, it undeniably does, but how individuals, institutions, and societies can shape digital ecosystems that nurture well-being, autonomy, and ethical interaction. Understanding behavior in the digital age means not only decoding how we act online, but also recognizing the invisible forces, algorithms, design choices, and collective norms that shape our attention, emotions, identities, and decisions in the interconnected world we now inhabit. Conclusion. The conclusion of Decoding Human Behavior brings together the diverse insights presented throughout the book into a cohesive and thought-provoking reflection on what it means to understand ourselves and others in an increasingly complex world. It emphasizes that human behavior is not the product of a single force but a deeply interwoven tapestry of biological predispositions, psychological processes, social dynamics, cultural norms, and technological influences. The book's core message is that to truly decode behavior, one must move beyond simplistic explanations, such as blaming character flaws or assuming free will operates in isolation, and instead embrace a multi-layered, systems-oriented perspective that considers both internal mechanisms and external environments. From the neurons firing in our brains to the beliefs shaped by our cultures, and from the unconscious biases we carry to the invisible nudges of digital algorithms, our actions are continuously shaped by forces both seen and unseen, controllable and automatic. This final chapter revisits the major themes. The biology of behavior reminds us that emotions, instincts, and mental health challenges often have deep physiological roots. The psychology of decision-making shows how heuristics, biases, and emotions drive our choices far more than rational calculation. Emotion and motivation reveal how inner feelings act as signals guiding behavior toward needs and goals. Social influence and group dynamics demonstrate the powerful, often invisible pull of peer pressure, authority, and social norms. Communication and body language highlight how much of human interaction occurs non-verbally, beneath conscious awareness. Personality and individual differences account for why we behave differently in the same situations. Culture and identity show that behavior is deeply contextual and shaped by shared narratives and values. Deception and self-deception underscore the complexity of human truth-telling, and how our need for self-protection can lead us to hide not only from others but also from ourselves. And behavior in the digital age illustrates how technology is reshaping everything, from our attention spans to our identities, often in ways that outpace our capacity to reflect or adapt. The conclusion challenges readers to apply this understanding practically, not only to decode others but to engage in self-reflection with humility, recognizing the unconscious patterns, inherited tendencies, and situational influences that drive their own actions. It proposes that the real value of decoding behavior lies in developing empathy, not as a vague moral ideal, but as a disciplined effort to understand the conditions, pressures, and perspectives behind people's actions, including those we find difficult or irrational. The book urges readers to move away from judgmental or reductionist thinking and toward a more compassionate, evidence-informed approach to understanding human nature. At the same time, it cautions against using behavioral insights as tools for manipulation, control, or overgeneralization, noting that ethical awareness is essential in applying psychological and behavioral science in fields such as marketing, politics, leadership, education, and personal relationships. The conclusion also touches on the dangers of over-reliance on behavioral predictions, reminding us that while patterns exist, human beings retain a capacity for change, contradiction, and growth that defies complete prediction or categorization. We are both products of our past and authors of our future. One of the chapter's central ideas is that self-awareness is a lifelong process and that by understanding the forces that shape our behavior, we can learn to respond more mindfully rather than react automatically. This ability to pause, reflect, and choose is framed not only as a psychological skill but as a moral and civic one, vital for navigating a world filled with noise, distraction, misinformation, and division. The chapter calls for fostering environments, schools, homes, workplaces, online spaces, that support emotional literacy, critical thinking, and meaningful connection, thereby allowing individuals and communities to flourish. Importantly, the conclusion acknowledges the limits of behavioral insight. No model or theory can fully capture the richness of human life, nor should we aim to reduce people to data points or diagnoses. Instead, understanding behavior is a tool for greater wisdom, tolerance, and conscious action. The final reflection encourages readers to view behavior not as a static outcome to be judged, but as a dynamic process to be explored, with curiosity, compassion, and courage. We are constantly in the process of becoming, and by decoding behavior, not to control but to connect, we move closer to a world where people are not merely reacting to forces beyond their awareness but living with greater intention, integrity, and understanding. Ultimately, decoding human behavior is a call to embrace the complexity of what it means to be human, to acknowledge our shared struggles and innate biases, our biological limits and boundless potential, and to use the tools of science and self-inquiry not as weapons of critique, but as instruments of connection, healing, and growth. The journey of decoding behavior is not just about observing others, it is about recognizing ourselves in them, understanding the threads that bind us, and choosing, in every moment, to behave with a little more awareness, empathy, and purpose than we did the moment before.